Welcome to the first ever episode of Nerd Space Games Video Game Jeopardy. That's right, I am your host of Nerd Space Games and your host for this episode of Jeopardy, as I am going to test you guys and your knowledge on video games. But specifically, this very first ever episode has a special edition because today's episode is completely dedicated to, well, you guessed it, Resident Evil. That's right, I'm going to test you on everything and anything related to Resident Evil. Anyway, let's take a look at today's topics for Video Game Jeopardy. So the first category is weapons. Weapons is relating to everything and anything related to any weapon inside the Resident Evil universe. Monsters, as we're going to test you and your knowledge about the creatures and monsters of the Resident Evil franchise. Who said it? This is me giving you guys a quote and you have to identify which character in the Resident Evil universe said this line. Save rooms. I'm going to play a soundtrack from a Resident Evil game and it's going to be the save room theme song from that video game. You have to guess which Resident Evil game that save room theme is from. The original trilogy, of course, testing your knowledge of the original 3 Resident Evil games. And remakes, which of course is testing you of your knowledge of the remakes for the Resident Evil franchise. The rules for Video Game Jeopardy are pretty simple. Basically, there are 6 categories with 5 questions each, and each of these questions are going to be different depending on their difficulty and their point value. For example, the 100-point question is going to be the easiest question inside that category, whereas the 500-point question is going to be the most difficult question in that category. You get it right, you get the points, you add them to, well, yourself. You have to keep track of your own score, obviously. After we clear the board, we are going to jump over to Final Jeopardy, where you get to place a bid on how well you are going to do in a specific category relating to Resident Evil in this situation. At the end of the video, make sure you leave in the comments, let me know what your score was and what you thought about, well, Video Game Jeopardy and what you want to see on maybe the next episode of Video Game Jeopardy. Now, with the rules out of the way and you know what the categories are now, we are ready to play some Video Game Jeopardy. I'm going to start with the 100-point questions first, moving down to the 200-point questions, and so on until we clear the board. So let's jump straight into the first category for 100 points, weapons. This name is given to Barry's Custom 44 Magnum and Resident Evil Remake. What is the Silver Serpent? Moving to our next category, monsters for 100 points. This boss fight was removed from Resident Evil 4 Remake and is rumored to be in the Separate Ways DLC. Correct answer is, who is U3? Now it's time for Who Said It for 100 points. 7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you. It's really hard not to do the voice with this, but of course this is Who is Albert Wesker?
7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
Save rooms for 100 points, of course. This save room music is from this Resident Evil game. What is Resident Evil 2, the original? Original trilogy for 100 points. Barry gives you this when he says the following. It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. What is acid rounds? And the final category for 100 points, remakes. This new area was only in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and it's where Chief Irons brings Sherry. Chief Irons is probably one of the creepiest characters in the Resident Evil franchise. That's absolutely true, and I actually learned a little bit more about him from you guys, the viewers. But of course, the location is, what is the orphanage? Hopefully you guys went 5 for 5 with those questions, because those are going to be the easiest questions we come across on this round of Jeopardy. But now we are moving on to the 200-point round. So for 200 points in the category of weapons. The Lemmy is the first handgun Ethan finds in Resident Evil Village. Ethan can also find this amount of customizable parts for it. Correct answer is, what is 2? For 200 points in the category of monsters, Plant 43 appears in this Resident Evil game. Now, you might have said Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 1 Remake, and I could understand the confusion, but if you're a true fan, you didn't fall for this one. It is actually Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 2 Remake. What is Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 2 Remake? For 200 points, who said it? I think we both know this is where we go our separate ways. One of the first hints that we get towards a Separate Ways DLC was actually said by Leon. Who is Leon in the Resident Evil 4 remake?
You coming?
I think we both know this. It's where we go our separate ways.
Save rooms for 200 points. Of course, I'm going to play this soundtrack and you have to name which Resident Evil game it's from. That is, of course, what is Resident Evil Code Veronica. And now we move on to the OG trilogy once again for 200 points. In Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, you can meet Carlos for the first time at the restaurant or this place. The correct answer is, what is the Raccoon Press?
Hey,
Where am I?
relax. You're fine.
If you say so, but my head feels like it's about to explode. Anyway, name's Carlos. Glad to meet you, lady.
And finally, the last category for 200 points, remakes. While the inside of the area was cut for Resident Evil 3 Remake, the boss fight outside of this area still remains in the remake. Of course, we are talking about, what is the clock tower?
You're about to take a nasty fall.
12 questions out of the way, 18 questions left remaining. Let's move over to weapons for 300 points. The Ditman glitch in Resident Evil 4 became the holy grail for speedrunners as it allowed Leon to move much faster by exploiting this weapon. That is, of course, what is the Striker shotgun? Moving on to monsters for 300 points. This is the name of Lisa Trevor's mom. Lisa Trevor is probably the most tragic character in the entire Resident Evil series, but of course the answer to this question is, who is Jessica? Now it's time for another quote as we head over to Who Said It for 300 points. There's a price tag for everything, even letting the world burn. Of course, it's the evil son of a bitch from Resident Evil 3 Remake, Nikolai.
Why'd you do it?
There's a price tag for everything. Even letting the world burn.
Next up, for 300 points, save rooms. This save room music is from this Resident Evil game. Name it. The correct answer is, what is Resident Evil Director's Cut? You can actually tell because it has the original Resident Evil soundtrack. However, it's kind of tweaked with that weird Twinkle Twinkle Little Star melody or whatever the hell that is. Yeah, Director's Cut, the music in that, not the greatest. Have you guys heard the story about that? Anyway, OG Trilogy for 300 points. In Resident Evil 2, Claire and Leon meet outside of this diner. The correct answer is Emmy's.
Hello? Is anyone here?
And once again, the final category for 300 points, remakes. There are a total of this many small keys in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Correct answer is, what is 8? There are 8 small keys throughout Resident Evil 4 Remake. Trust me, I've counted. I went through the game specifically just so I can get the answer to this fucking question. Yeah, I'm dedicated. And if you've been counting, we are now down to the 400 point questions. Guys, things are getting real intense because things are going to get a little bit more difficult. Starting with, of course, weapons for 400 points. By release date, this Resident Evil game was the first to feature the Samurai Edge. Okay, so notice how I said by release date. That is because the original Resident Evil game actually technically did not feature the Samurai Edge. Sure, it said handgun, and it kind of looks similar to the Samurai Edge, but the first time we actually officially get the name Samurai Edge is in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Of course, the remakes Resident Evil 1 and 2 actually even retcon that when they add in the Samurai Edge, but technically the first game to feature, and by release date, the first game to feature the Samurai Edge is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. But moving on to monsters for 400 points. Also known as Titan, this is the name of the zombie elephant that attacks the players in the Raccoon City Zoo. So I'm sure we all know this elephant by Titan, but his official name is, of course, Who is Oscar? Who said it for 400 points? Fair is fair, kid. So this one, you either know it or you don't, and it's actually a scene in the post-credit scene of Resident Evil 6, and that is, of course, said by Jake Mueller.
Fair, kid.
Now we move on to save rooms for 400 points. Simple. Name the game that this save room theme song is from. Alright, and the correct answer is, what is Resident Evil 0? Now we're back to the original trilogy for 400 points. Live selection is a feature in the original Resident Evil 3 that allows branching storylines. Minimum, the player comes across at least this many of them in the entire game. Okay, so straight up, this question might be a little bit confusing, and I know it's pretty long, but basically the correct answer is 9. And finally, remakes for 400 points. Also known as Ghost, in Resident Evil 2 Remake, this Alpha team member is the one that shoots Birkin and gets his own Ghost Survivor DLC. And the correct answer is, who is Martinez?
This is my life's work. I'm not handing over anything.
We have our orders, Dr. Birkin. I'll ask you one more time. Stop! Hold your fire! What the fuck were you thinking? Our orders were to bring him in alive.
Okay guys, this is it. We are now down to the final 6 questions, the hardest questions of each and every category on this list. Are you guys ready? Get pumped, get hyped. It's the 500 point round starting now. course, starting with weapons for 500 points. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, this was the name of the starting handgun for both Ada and Daniel. That is, of course, what is the Broom HE. Next up, monsters for 500 points. In the original Resident Evil 2, the canister carrying Mr. X said this on it. So officially, Mr. X is actually known as T-103. However, they created a nickname for that for whatever reason, and on the canister actually has that nickname on there, and it actually says T-00. Next up, who said it for 500 points? Oh boy. Okay, so you guys might have to check on this one for me. I don't believe this was said anywhere else except for Resident Evil 2, the original game. However, the correct answer that I know for sure this line was said by Leon in Resident Evil 2, the original game, when he sees the liquor. He thinks that instead of running away or screaming or freaking out, he says, oh boy. Next up, save rooms for 500 points. As always, name the game that this save room music is from. This is probably one of the most underrated theme songs for a save room, but that is, of course, Resident Evil Survivor. Next up, the original trilogy, 500 points. In Resident Evil 2, after your first playthrough with Ada, she can throw 2 items back to Leon. Name both of them. Be specific. Okay, I did say be specific, guys. That is because I do not want to accept an answer that is a key and bullets. No, specifically, I want to hear what are the club key and shotgun shells. I'm sorry I got specific, guys. If you are true fans of the original games, you probably already knew that, though. Come on, let's be real here. And finally, the last question on the board for 500 points, it's remakes. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, the code to the locker on the West Wing's 3rd floor is this. Okay, so if you were me, the first answer I would have gave immediately without thinking about it would have been Cap. Cap is the easiest one to remember for some reason. But the answer to this question is actually, what is DCM? Let me know in the comments if you got that one, guys. Be honest, don't lie to me now. But that's it. The board is clear, guys, which means it is time for Final Jeopardy. Let's get it, guys. Get hyped, get pumped. It's time for Final Jeopardy. You need to put your bids in, but first, let's take a look at what the Final Jeopardy category is. That's right, guys. It is Resident Evil Revelations. Something relating to Resident Evil Revelations. How confident do you feel? If you feel pretty confident, go all in. Why not? Let's go for it. But keep in mind, if you get the question wrong, you lose all the points that you bet. So be very, very careful with your choice here. Think carefully. Final Jeopardy category, Revelations. What are you going to do? It's time. It's time for the final question. Make or break time, guys. The category is Revelations, and the question is, In Resident Evil Revelations, there are a total of 3 sister ships: Queen Zenobia, Queen Samaris, and this ship. Okay, all right, time is up. It's time to see if your bid was a good one or if you just fucked up your entire score. Here it is. The correct answer is, what is the Queen Dido? Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. I honestly wouldn't have got that question right. Let me know in the comments if you got Final Jeopardy correct, and let me know what your final score is for the first ever Video Game Jeopardy. Of course, this is a Resident Evil themed Jeopardy. However, keep in mind that next week is not going to be like that, because every single week we're going to do multiple different categories, focus on tons of different video games out there. This week I wanted to do something special since it's our first ever episode of Video Game Jeopardy, and that's why we dedicated it to Resident Evil. But anyways, guys, let me know what you think of this concept. Do you really like Video Game Jeopardy? Do you want to see more stuff like this? Do you have any ideas of what you want to see for categories on future episodes? Leave the suggestions. I might pick yours. Anyways, guys, it's been so exciting to have you on board. Hopefully you really enjoyed this. I worked really hard on the concept of this, and I hope it does well, because I want to continue to do this, and we'll see how well it does for the next few weeks. If it does good, we'll see more of it. If it doesn't do good, well, it might go out the door. But anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.